If you recall, in our first lesson, we learned about the beginning of the War of 1812 with America and the British colonies. And here are just some reviews of each of our pictures that we looked at. So what was happening here? And what were these important men doing here? What is this important document that we still have in use today? What does this map show? And what did this represent? What was this picture showing? What did this map show? And then what was this last picture? So if you remember, Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory, doubling the size of the United States. At the time, France and Britain were fighting each other in the Napoleonic Wars. The British began to capture or impress American sailors. The French and the British interfered with American trade by blockading important U.S. ports. Did the United States government want to get involved with France and Britain's argument? Did it want to choose sides? What do you remember about George Washington? So, when George Washington was President of the United States, he coordinated an agreement between the United States and Great Britain. The British promised not to do anything to bother U.S. ships and interfere in their trade business. The agreement was signed by both countries. An official agreement like this, signed by two countries, is called a treaty. Today, our vocabulary. Go ahead and get out your vocabulary or your glossary packet in your binder. The first word, abandon. This is a verb. To stop doing something, to give up entirely. Example, we had to abandon the idea that we would have ice cream cones after dinner when we realized we were out of ice cream. Committee, noun. A group of people who come together to complete a task or make decisions. Example, the parent-teacher committee is a group of parents and teachers who work together to make our school a better place. So a different way of writing the word is committees. Patience, a noun. The ability to wait for a long time without being upset. Example, we had to have a lot of patience when we were waiting all day for the party to start. Suspicious, this is an adjective. Having or showing a feeling that something is wrong or that someone is behaving wrongly. Example, my dad was very suspicious that something was wrong with our car when it kept making strange noises. Treaty, this is a noun. An agreement between countries. Example, the Treaty of Versailles outlined what various nations had agreed to in order to end World War I. A variation on that is treaties. This word treaty is in your glossary, in your vocabulary packet. Here's the word treaty in your packet. Go ahead and jot down a short definition for that. Treaty, an agreement between countries. Have you ever had two friends who were upset with each other? I want you to think about how they felt when their friends were disagreeing. Did they get involved? Did they take sides? Did they try to get them to work it out? Today's read aloud is about what happens when two countries, Great Britain and France, who were both friends with the United States, began fighting with each other. I want you to listen carefully to find out whether the United States gets involved when Great Britain and France begin fighting with each other. Go ahead and pull out your listening journal. Okay, go ahead and turn to page 2 in your listening journal. It says Lesson 2, America in 1812, Part 2, Triple R, Really Rad Research. So the directions are, as your teacher reads aloud, listen for facts about the words listed below. When your teacher pauses, write a fact or draw a quick sketch about the word or phrases in the box. So we've got USS Chesapeake, Embargo Act of 1807, Battle of Tippecanoe, and Warhawks. So please listen carefully to find out whether the United States gets involved when Great Britain and France begin fighting with each other. After the Revolutionary War, each of the first three presidents of the United States wanted the United States and Great Britain to be friends again. So these are the three presidents: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. Even before the Napoleonic Wars began, George Washington had tried to establish a peaceful relationship with the British. Remember, George Washington was the first president of the United States. Under his leadership, the United States and Great Britain signed a treaty called Jay's Treaty. And a treaty is an agreement between two countries. In this treaty, the British promised not to get involved or interfere with the United States business or activities. Do you think the British kept their promise? During this time, one of the most common ways for two countries to maintain a good relationship was to trade with each other. The United States sent flour and tobacco and other goods to Great Britain. Great Britain sent tea and manufactured goods to America. When the Napoleonic Wars began in Europe, France and Great Britain became enemies. The United States was caught in the middle. The U.S. government really did not want to have to get involved. So the United States was friends with Great Britain and with France, and now the two were fighting. So merchants in New England relied on trade with Britain to run their businesses. France had helped America during the Revolutionary War. The United States wanted to keep that friendship too. However, when U.S. ships, cargo, and sailors were being threatened, especially by the British, the United States could not ignore it. What do you think the United States will do? In 1807, while Thomas Jefferson was president, something happened at sea that made many Americans very angry with the British. As they often did, a British ship stopped a U.S. ship at sea. The American ship was the USS Chesapeake. USS stands for United States Ship. When the British commander demanded that the Chesapeake be searched, the American captain refused. The British commander did not like that. He ordered his men to open fire. Several American sailors died in the attack. After that, many members of Congress began to call for war with Britain. And members of Congress were the people elected to represent the states. So those members in Congress who wanted the United States to go to war were known as war hawks. And war hawks were the congressmen who wanted America to go to war with Britain to defend its freedom. As time went on, President Jefferson was losing patience with the British. Patience refers to the ability to wait for something without getting upset. So if Thomas Jefferson was losing patience, it means he tried and tried to stop their aggression. In response to the attack on the USS Chesapeake, Thomas Jefferson passed the Embargo Act of 1807. An embargo is a government order that limits trade. The Embargo Act stated that U.S. ports would be closed to foreign ships, especially British ships. An act is a law made by the government. To act also means to perform as a character in a play or musical. So this meant that there would be no more trade with Britain. The U.S. government hoped that Britain would lose so much money that they would be forced to change their ways. However, the Embargo Act caused more problems for American farmers and merchants in New England and New York than it did for the British. So here was from the previous lesson. Do you think the Embargo Act will work? Here's the current empty port. Do you think that Embargo Act will work? You might think that what was happening at sea was enough to drive the United States to war with Great Britain. But there were even more problems on American land. Even though Britain had lost the 13 colonies to America, it still had control of land in the northern Great Lakes region and the northwestern territories. Britain also controlled part of what is now Canada. Canada was not a country at this time. The British had forts and outposts along the United States and Canadian border. An outpost is a military camp that is located in another country. Most Americans during this time were farmers. Many settlers were moving west in search of land to farm. So the wagons are on American land. And across the river here is British Canada. There's an outpost right here. The U.S. government began to suspect that the British were interfering with Americans who were settling in the Northern Territories, especially in the Ohio River Valley and the Indiana Territory. They believed that Britain was using its outposts in Canada to help Native Americans who were fighting to defend their land from the settlers. Why were Native Americans fighting frontier settlers? In 1811, many Native Americans fought to remove settlers from their land in the Battle of Tippecanoe. The U.S. Army fought back. The American soldiers had reason to believe that the Native Americans received weapons from the British. The British denied it. They insisted that they were only trading with Native Americans, nothing more. Do you think that's true? But now the war hawks, those who supported going to war with Britain, were furious. The British were attacking American ships at sea, and now they were causing trouble on American soil as well. The war hawks in Congress put together a committee. A committee is a group of people who work together on something. Many of the war hawks' supporters in Congress were from the northern and western territories of the United States. They were the ones who were most suspicious of the British. If they were suspicious, that means they had reason to believe the British were doing something. James Madison was the fourth president of the United States. Like the other presidents before him, he tried to find a way to avoid conflict with Britain. He knew that the United States was still a young nation with less than 8 million people. That's about the same number of people today in New York City. He knew they did not have a large army or navy, but the war hawks believed that if the United States was going to fight Britain, now was the time. Britain was busy fighting the Napoleonic Wars. It could not have enough soldiers, sailors, and ships to fight the United States too. Some Americans thought that winning a war with Britain might also be an opportunity to gain more land. There was land to the north and to the south that they wanted. Finally, the war hawks wanted to prove that the United States was a strong country. Still, President Madison did not want to rush into war. He continued to ask the British government to stop interfering with U.S. ships and to stop trading with and arming Native Americans. However, the British continued to ignore the president's requests. With the war hawks demanding war, James Madison finally agreed. On June 18, 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. In 1812, what job did most Americans have? What areas of land in North America did Britain still control? What did the U.S. government suspect Britain of doing? What term was used to describe the people in the U.S. government who wanted to go to war? Why do you think the United States wanted to have a good relationship with Britain and France? Why do you think that Native Americans did not want settlers on their land? In the read aloud you heard, President Jefferson was losing patience with the British. Say the word patience with me. Patience. Patience means having the ability to wait for something without getting angry or upset. At lunchtime, we need to have patience when we wait in line for our food. Can you think of a time when you showed patience? Try to use the word patience when you tell about it. What's the word we've been talking about? Patience. So this is a portrait of James Madison. And if you remember yesterday, we looked at portraits of Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, I believe. This is a portrait of James Madison. So he was the father of the Constitution, and he was the President of the United States during the War of 1812. He was the fourth President of the United States.